Welcome to Blue Rain's podcast. Today we are honored with the presence of interviewing Doug West, painter extraordinaire, landscape painter extraordinaire. I wanted to do this for a while too, and just ask a little bit more about where you came from, what inspired you. We're going to go down a list of things.
I'm ready.
So where were you born and where were you raised?
I was born in Riverside, California, and I grew up there until I left to go to college. And the beauty of that for me is I'm old enough to say that I remember Southern California before it was one spread out massive suburbia. It was quite rural, and Riverside actually had orange groves, and I had a dad who loved to go camping. So I saw a lot of California from that home base. That definitely influenced me in a way that manifested later in my life.
Did you get into surfing and things of that nature?
A little bit, Leroy. A little bit. I because I graduated from high school in the mid '60s, and so there was the Beach Boys, and they were just Bruce Brown was just producing surf films, and he then got into skiing films as well. But I was definitely learned to surf in a minor sort of way, but Riverside was about an hour away from the beach. And if I could hook a ride with friends who had a station wagon, not a Woody, but a station wagon, we'd head down. And actually I spent a lot of time at the beach because my grandparents had a beach house in Newport Beach. So, but it wasn't really a surfing beach. It was a body surfing beach.
Body surfing. So you said your dad liked to take you camping and things of that nature?
Yeah. He that was really what he loved to do. He loved to jump into our station wagon loaded with camping gear, and we'd head off for a week to go to Death Valley or the High Sierras or Yosemite. So I saw a lot of the state as a young kid. Later on, when I was in high school, he arranged for a family friend, to let me use his Honda 305, which was like the biggest motorcycle they made at the time. We both had motorcycles. We went all the way up the Central Valley and then came down the coastline, camping all the way. That was a lot of fun. And of course, this is going to lead into the fact that unknowingly, all those experiences out there in nature, and having the freedom to explore as a kid. My dad and I would go camping, and I was kind of set loose. I could go out and explore. He wasn't trying to keep me on a leash. And so all of that informed me in a way. And because of that, I've always looked for places to live that had a rural feeling, rather than urban.
Oh, that was cool. Well, it seems like that's a foundation for your future, if you think about it. All that outdoor exploration.
Yeah. Well, it turned out that way.
Yeah. So, when did you decide you wanted to become an artist?
Yeah, I would have to say I backed my way into it. Yeah. I always enjoyed using my hands. And, people talk about, at 5 years old I was drawing and I knew I wanted to be an artist. I wasn't that way at all. I used my hands to build crafts-like projects, woodworking, working with clay in school. But actually, in high school, I didn't take any art classes whatsoever. And actually, we did a little promotion for me with Blue Rain earlier in the summer that was a Zoom conference. Yeah. And I talked about the fact, a couple of things were pivotal for me. In high school, I attended high school assembly where the art teacher gave a program about contemporary art. And he showed a Picasso painting and tied it to a photograph he had from World War II of a dead Nazi soldier, and the same face was in this painting of Picasso.
Oh, wow.
It was the bombing of Guernica. I think this Guernica is the title of the painting. And it had a visceral impact on me. I thought, wow, that's a symbolic language that has a real power to it. I didn't think of it as, oh, I want to become an artist. I thought of it as, there's depth there that I don't know about. So I started paying attention and reading art books. Then in college, I'm working around to your answer here. In college, I was drifting. I mean, I loved going to college, and I loved studying geology and many different things, but I happened to take a night class in ceramics, and it just grabbed me. And I started having dreams about making pottery. And a fellow student who was a graduate student, I was an undergraduate, said, oh, gee, he's sort of a mystical kind of guy. And he said, if you're having dreams about it, you should major in it. And so I did. It wasn't two-dimensional work, it was three-dimensional work. And I ended up getting a degree in ceramics, or in fine arts, but with a major in ceramics and also a major in sculpture.
Oh, so a mixture of both. So what were you drawn to in the ceramic part, the vessel format or the figurative?
I was, it started with working with a wheel, and it evolved into, after getting the degree, I moved to Hawaii to get a teacher's credential, because I knew I didn't want to be a studio potter. I just didn't think I could support my family and do that. So I got a teacher's credential and ended up getting a job working for the Army at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii as a civil servant, teaching ceramics. And I had a really nice lab there. It was at a time when the Army was was trying to get it shifted from conscription to a volunteer service, and one of the draws that they would offer people was a recreational services of all sorts. And so we really had a nice facility that offered ceramics, photography, jewelry making, etc. And so I had a really nice lab, and there it was primarily doing slab building sculpture. Wow. Fairly large. We were limited by the size of the kiln I had, which was a fairly large kiln, gas kiln, but a gas-fired kiln, high temperature, and I was doing figurative work then.
I've never seen any examples of that. One of these days.
Nor have I. Well, yeah, Leroy, I left Hawaii in the mid-'70s, let's see, 1974, moved to Santa Fe and with my ex-wife, and my daughter was born here in 75. At that time, had a job working up for the lab in Los Alamos as a model maker. I talked my way into that job because I had skills as a craftsman. And I was building architectural representations of buildings that they were proposed facilities that they were going to build, and they would take these three-dimensional models that were fairly large to DC to get funding. They're the kind of thing where you'd have a plastic spray-painted color with trees outside representation of a building. You'd lift off the roof lid, and you could look inside and see the equipment in the room, that kind of thing. And I liked the job a lot, but I'd come home in the evenings, and I really felt like I wanted something more creative to be doing that really spoke to being and messing with art. And then I started making silkscreen prints, and really that's
a big jump.
Well, you know what? I had made some posters to advertise classes in Hawaii, the ceramics classes that I was teaching, and the posters were printed with silkscreen process. Cut a stencil, mix some ink, pull the squeegee across the screen. Once you got the stencil cut and attached to the screen, you pull the squeegee, got a poster,
Yeah.
basically, you know.
You make it sound so easy.
And so I think it started that the idea started that I would make a calendar as a Christmas present for family members. It turned out to be way too complicated.
So this was around 76, 77?
Yeah, 76, 77. And I kind of abandoned that project, but I got hooked by doing the silk screening, turned into making some landscapes, turned into going to an arts and crafts fair at the La Fonda Hotel that was a Christmas junior league sponsored event.
Humble beginnings.
And I sold a bunch of things, you know, $5 a piece. and so that was fuel to the fire. And I kept making them, and then eventually got into Elaine Horowitz Gallery. And
I didn't realize you were showing.
Yeah, I was at Elaine Horowitz. That was in 1979.
We've had 3 artists so far that have come from Elaine Horowitz.
Well,
Billy
Scheck was there.
Dave,
Fritz was there.
David Bradley.
David Bradley. I met David way back then. Yeah. You know, it was the early time in Santa Fe.
That was a fun time.
It was a fun time. And Leroy was right on the edge of this feeding frenzy for Southwest everything.
Yeah, I figured a lot of flair was starting to develop here in Santa Fe, because I think of the story yesterday of Billy and that big white Cadillac he used to drive around town, and you know, it was such a scene.
A
lot of characters.
I mean, it was a really interesting time. R.C. Gorman was up in Taos, and he
was booming. Oh yeah.
The same thing was up in Taos too.
Yeah,
right?
there was because of R.C. and his influence, and a lot of the Taos founders were there, and so.
Well, and you had Dennis Hopper.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I have stories for Dennis Hopper. Man. He used to come to the gallery all the time, at least once or twice a year. And but I got to know him eventually. Golfed with him a couple times. But
yeah, he's a big art collector too.
Oh yeah. One time I was in the LA Art Show. I know we're deviating. We'll get back to this, but I was at the LA Art Show, and there was this photograph of Dennis Hopper holding numbers, and it says Taos Police Department.
Oh, those kind of numbers.
Yeah, and I have a friend, a mutual friend, who is a major producer in Hollywood, and so I asked him, because he used to come in to the gallery. I never got to know him as well as many years later, but I asked him, what was that about? He's all, yeah, Dennis, he was a little hooked on some stuff and went down to the Taos Plaza and shot up the trees with his 6-shooter. So they cuffed and stuffed him. Anyways,
there's more stories there, I know. Because I remember hearing you got run out of town.
I can't even get into it. But,
anyway,
yeah.
Back to me.
Back to you. So my first introduction to your work, which I mentioned in the first podcast that we did, when I was first married to Tammy, I got her into 2 galleries, and one of them was Andrew's Pueblo Pottery.
Yep.
And that was a tiny shop. And it was full of pots, but the little few places they had wall space, there's Doug West serigraphs.
It's real interesting how they happen.
Yeah.
Well, and similar with in a way with you, not in the same way, but I think that you as a gallery owner have an eye for what you like, and I would tie this back a little bit to my crafts work. I really like working in detail, and I like working in paint now versus printmaking, because I can make clouds a little more expressionistic and there's a fluidity there, but essentially detail is still a big deal to me, and that's in Native American pottery as well. Yeah,
you're right on that. That was what impressed me about the serigraphs. I'm like, these are silk screens. Look at the amount of detail in there. So you must have had a lot of cutting time.
I just kept evolving, Leroy. Yeah. I mean, and the deal was for me that I started, much like I started painting, and the first prints were very, very crude. And my eye knew what I wanted to portray. I just didn't have the tools to be able to do it in the medium. And because I was my own printmaker, nobody else was printing for me throughout my career, it kept evolving. And and it was simplistic and had a style that was unique right from the start,
Yes.
sort of. And when I started working larger and I got representation like Elaine Horowitz and some advertisement, it was right at that time when the art market here for Southwestern art was picking up. And so I had a show once where it was reviewed by a critic from the New Mexican. And my work was simple, and he talked about my work being like soap bubble clouds, something. It was really kind of a pan on my work. And that it kind of irritated me, but it pushed me to make things more and more detailed so that nobody could say that. And moreover, I had people already starting to emulate my style. Yep. I thought, well, if they wanted to copy me, they're going to have to really work hard.
Especially in that medium. I mean, holy cow. So
yeah, most of my prints would have about 60 printings.
Yeah.
60 separate stencils up to 120.
That's crazy.
Nobody wanted to spend that kind
That's a lot of work.
Nobody wanted to copy that. And that really was by intention. And the benefit of that, of course, was that even though they're a stylized representation of nature, they got to be pretty graphically correct. Mm-hmm. People would say, "Oh yeah, that's a Doug West landscape," because they could identify the place and the lighting condition, the colors, etc.
So how many years was the serigraphing? Was it 77 up to the time you met BlueRainGallery?
Yeah, pretty much, Leroy. I think I made my last print about 1998, 99, and you started representing me in 99. I had certainly started painting a number, maybe 10 years before that, but in fits and starts. Yeah. And that gave me the benefit, you gave me the benefit to do nothing but painting. And I had a similar growth cycle with that. Yeah. I think you remember.
I am very impressed about the progression you made from changing mediums. And your first paintings were spectacular, but what you're doing now is a step up.
Well, it's a journey, and that's what I love about being an artist. I don't want to stop progressing. And some of what enables me to progress is interpreting different landscapes in different ways. And certainly the florals are a little bit of a departure. Florals with landscape or a departure, but it's a creative journey. Yeah. It keeps me fresh.
We've actually posted a few of your florals, and we always get commentary, hey, that's like Georgia O'Keeffe. But mm-hmm. It's different. It's a lot more detail. Hers is a lot more loose. And
I have a lot of great respect and admiration for her work, and I would be lying to not say that that's part of the influence. But in a totally different way. It's not as symbolically. It's symbolic, but it's not as emotionally stylized. It's more kind of a graphic representation.
So let's talk a little bit about your subject. It seems mostly northern and southern New Mexico corridors for the most part, which mm-hmm. really inspires you. Why?
Well, and bordering off into the Four Corners as well. The reason I've lived here, Leroy, I moved here from Hawaii, remember, just as an experiment. I never really thought I could live away from the ocean. And what was special to me was the unlimited horizon line like you have with an ocean. Could see great depth of field and sparsely populated. So you could get out in the land and have a personal experience with nature. And New Mexico is singularly beautiful. The entire state, it just has a different feeling. I live in Mexico now, way down the Baja Peninsula, for much the same reason. Now I'm next to the ocean and I can see that water body out there, but it's a rural setting, And it's connected with nature. And every time I drive back up here and spend time exploring new places, because I'm primarily still painting New Mexico, every time I cross over from Arizona into New Mexico, I just think, oh my gosh, there's like a dividing line.
There's a difference, isn't there?
There really is. It's really special. So that it's in my bones and will always be.
So you've lived in a few places in New Mexico.
I have.
So,
I lived in Santa Fe, and then I've spent, I guess about 12 years down in Socorro. And the beauty of that was there are just many vast and unexplored areas down there, and it's wide open. A lot of it's BLM land that you can go on to with no permission whatsoever. You just drive out there, or ranches that just ask permission, or make sure you close the gates as you go through. And that afforded me a lot of landscapes around that area, but also the opportunity to explore southern New Mexico, middle and southern New Mexico. And then after that, I moved up to Taos. And that's as you know, having lived there, it's an extraordinarily beautiful place.
Yeah, one of my favorite paintings of yours was a white sands painting. That was really cool.
Oh, Leroy! When I lived in Socorro, that was my sanctuary and refuge. Yeah. I was making prints there, and I would every once in a while load up my backpack. I was also in search and rescue there, so I had all of the equipment pretty much ready to go at a moment's notice. I'd grab my backpack and some water, and I'd drive down to White Sands and onto the national park down there, and they have a campground. And I'd drive out to the parking for the campground, walk about 100 yards towards the campground where nobody could see me, and then I'd turn a right and get as far out into the dunes as possible and set up my tent and spend a night or two out there. And I just loved it. It's so serene. It's like a snowfield. You know?
Yeah, you can get lost out there really easy.
And the deal is, it's like by skiers. So it's like a snow area in that snow absorbs sound. And the sand down there does as well. It's just still and quiet and untouched. That's what I love, that untouched look.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. And so the going back to the Taos time, this was a time where you started developing the original format, right?
Right.
And so, and I noticed a lot of like Pilar scenes and Rio Grande scenes at that point as well. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of natural beauty to that canyon, how it cracks that valley and just.
I spent, when I lived in Taos, I was out on the West Rim Trail of the Gorge about 4 times a week, maybe 5 times a week, riding my mountain bike. And I did that well through at least until the snow was on the ground. And when the snow was on the ground, then I'd be out there hiking. So the gorge is a favorite place of mine. A similar sanctuary. And the Rio Grande, and going down to Pilar, yes, I've interpreted that. And then the mountains, Taos Mountain is quite extraordinary. I have a new piece in this show that's of the Valdez Valley. Oh, right on. That is a real special place, seen from the southern end of the valley looking up. Taos has many different looks to it, if you think about it, hiking up in the mountains or out on the ocean of sage on the West Mesa. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then extraordinary light. I mean, color.
The light is amazing.
Color matters to me, and I think that's, if there's something that is a signature to my work, I do have it. I was born with a sense of how to mix color, how to see color. You know, a gallery owner once said I have more rods and cones in my eyes than the sensors for color. And I'm not blowing my own horn here, but colored as a representation of light and shadow, it matters.
Well, for the many years you've studied and applied and tried and experimented, you have a very nice style that's hard to imitate. And as far as imitation, you either get upset about it or you take it as a compliment.
Thank you.
You know, there's people that you have inspired, generations that you have inspired.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm happy to mentor people. I don't want them to copy me, but I am more than happy to
help them through the processes.
Yeah.
I think that's important. Before we end, I want to ask a couple of questions. Outside of painting, what other hobbies do you do?
Hobbies? Gosh, Leroy, you don't give me time for hobbies.
Are you still motorcycling and
I was
riding?
doing that up until a couple of years ago. That was a blast. I rode way all over the surrounding area around Todos Santos. I had a couple of friends about my age, and we go out there and tear it up. And I had a Honda 400s. So that was that's a powerful motorcycle and very weighty. Lifting that sucker up.
So if it falls on you, have to...
I'd dump it in the sand, and then it would take an act of will to get it back up. And a little bit of fishing, not much, fish, surf fishing, catch and release. Astronomy, I have a telescope that I put up on the roof, and it's really cool. It is computer driven, so I can, it'll track the stars.
So you get pretty clear skies like we have here in New Mexico down there?
Well, we do, but I'm right next to the ocean,
right.
So that's a mitigating factor. And it's nothing's like being up at altitude.
Right.
It's a big difference. As I was working on building frames this last week out on Toon Drive in Taos, out in the West Mesa. Taos is at 7,700 feet elevation, and the stars were just incredible.
Yeah, when you have a clear night, it is amazing. Sometimes I sit in my hot tub and
and the other thing, Leroy, is I love music. Okay, I'm not a musician, but I love music. And over the last, actually, one of your collectors took me to his home up in Bishop Park. I can't think of his name right now. The guy who invented the distillation process for caffeinated drinks.
I'm trying to think of who that is.
I'll remember it in a minute. But he played his sound system for me.
Oh, wow.
And it got me off into getting Class A amp with tubes and getting better speakers and
gold cables.
Cables and so I don't have a this is something you could buy a Porsche or more in investment. I have a very moderate, less than moderate, but a well-informed sound system that I just love listening to music where it's three-dimensional, great sound stage, great clarity, warmth, and so I've got some really nice equipment over the years that I've assembled.
That is nice. I have a lot of clients that have sound systems like that. I'm like, what? It costs as much as a house, man.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in today and spending time with us on the BlueRainGallery podcast.
Oh, you're welcome, Leroy. I'm really, it's been an honor and it's been wonderful over about 10 years now. 10 years of working together. It's really I feel honored to be in the midst of all the great artists that you have here.
Well, thanks for including us in your journey as well. So.
Of course. Thank you.
Until
Leroy.
next time.
Okay.
Hey, I know, hey, yo. Hey, I know, hey, yo. Hey, yo. Hey, I know, hey, yo. Hey, I know, hey, yo. Hey, yo. Hey, yo, hey, yo. Hey, yo. oh,